There are moments in television history when everything slows down, when the jokes stop, when the pre-written applause lines fall flat, and when a single presence enters the room not to perform, not to entertain, but to remind everyone what truth feels like. This was supposed to be just another taping of The View, the daytime talk show known for its sharp-tongued debates, viral moments, and celebrity banter had something different planned. It started with Joy Behar. "Let's invite him," she said one morning in the production meeting, stirring her coffee like she was stirring a pot of trouble. "Who?" one of the junior producers asked. Joy looked up, half smirking. "Ibrahim Traoré." A stunned silence swept across the table. "You mean the African president, the one all over social media lately?" another producer asked, cautiously. "Yeah, that one," Joy replied. "The man everyone calls a reformer, a rebel, a revolutionary. Whatever. He's too serious." Someone muttered. "He doesn't play politics like we do," added another. But Joy leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "Exactly. Let's see how he does on our turf. If he's the hero the internet thinks he is, let him prove it. Let's expose him." That was the moment the producers should have known they were in for something else entirely. But curiosity is a powerful drug, and ratings are an even stronger one. So, the invitation went out, to everyone's surprise. Traoré accepted. The morning of the taping, the studio buzzed with a kind of nervous energy. Makeup artists touched up foundation twice. Lighting was adjusted down to the millimeter. And Joy, known for her casual charm and cutting sarcasm, was rehearsing. She had her notes, her talking points, even a few zingers ready about human rights, democracy, and modern values. In her mind, this was going to be a masterclass in control. She would throw out the bait, and Traoré would take it, just like the others. Because men like him, they didn't do well under studio lights. She imagined him stiff, formal, maybe even confused by the rhythm of American media. He'd stumble, he'd lose the crowd, and Joy would take the victory lap, just in time for commercial break. But then he walked in. No entourage, no designer suit, no grand announcement. Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto the set, wearing a simple dark jacket. No tie, no flashy watch, just a small gold pin on his chest, shaped like the continent he came from. He moved calmly. His pace was measured. He nodded at the crew, at the co-hosts, even at Joy. Then he sat down with a kind of quiet control that didn't demand attention, it commanded it. The room changed. Not because he did anything dramatic, but because he didn't. There was no bravado, no self-promotion, no eager smile trying to win over the crowd. Just presence. Deep, still, unshakable presence. Joy felt it first. A flicker of unease. He's too calm, she thought. The audience settled. The lights dimmed. The theme music faded. And the red light on camera 1 blinked on. They were live. "Welcome back to The View," Joy began, smiling for the camera. "We've got a very special guest today. He's been called everything from a freedom fighter to a controversial strongman. Please welcome President Ibrahim Traoré." Polite applause. Joy turned to him with her signature half-smile. "Mr. Traoré, let's get real." She didn't waste time. "You're celebrated as this great African reformer, but your critics say you suppress the press. You reject foreign aid. And you've been accused of refusing to embrace democratic norms. So I'll ask you plainly, are you just another strongman hiding behind big speeches? A few polite gasps fluttered through the audience. The other co-hosts glanced at each other. Uncertain. Joy leaned back. Satisfied. She was ready for a denial. Or better, a flustered reaction. But Traore, he just looked at her. And then, slowly, deliberately, he said, "Are you asking as a journalist? Miss Behar, or as someone uncomfortable when the oppressed stop asking for permission?" Joy blinked. For a second, it wasn't clear whether she'd just been insulted or educated. The audience went silent. The tone was set. Joy shifted in her seat, her trademark smirk slipping. This wasn't the rhythm she expected. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't evasive. He was grounded. She regrouped quickly, flipping her note card. So it's oppression now to question power. She fired back. You claim to fight for freedom, yet you silence opposition and walk away from alliances. Doesn't sound very free to me. She chuckled, expecting a ripple of laughter. Instead, silence. No one laughed. Traore still hadn't moved. He kept his gaze steady and replied, "You speak of freedom," he said, as though it is something handed out like candy. "But where I come from, we remember the kind of freedom that arrived on ships with chains, with flags waving over stolen land." Joy's smile faltered, and for the first time, the studio audience didn't know whether to clap or just breathe. Traore wasn't angry. He wasn't loud. But something in his voice cut through the noise that usually filled this stage. He turned to the camera, not breaking eye contact. "You speak from a place," he said, "where freedom is fashionable, where questioning authority gets you likes, not prison, where dissent makes headlines, not graves." The co-host stayed still. Even Joy didn't interrupt. He wasn't playing the game. He was rewriting it. And for a show that usually ran on applause lines and sound bites, The View suddenly found itself facing something real. Too real. And this was just the beginning. By the second segment, something had changed. You could feel it in the studio. Like the temperature had dropped. Or the lights got just a little too bright. The usual rhythm of daytime television chatter, chuckles, and commercial breaks was broken. And Joy Behar knew it. She wasn't losing the audience's attention. She was losing their allegiance. The script in her hands felt heavier now. The note cards didn't give her the comfort they used to. And the guest in front of her, President Ibrahim Traore, wasn't just giving answers. He was changing the questions. Still, Joy wasn't ready to back down. She leaned in, determined to take back control. "Mr. Traore," she said, forcing a smile. "You speak poetically about struggle and history. But let's bring this into the present." She held up one of her cards like it was evidence in a trial. "You've been in power for over 2 years now. At what point do you stop blaming the past and start taking responsibility for the present?" There it was. A line she'd been saving. Sharp. Provocative. A challenge. Traore didn't flinch. He simply tilted his head. And then, with a voice so calm, it made the room tense all over again, he replied, "You think history ended because it no longer knocks on your door." He let the words hang in the air. And then he continued slowly. "Precisely. But in my country, The mines are still run by foreign hands. The contracts are still written in foreign languages. The schools still teach foreign heroes. Colonialism didn't disappear. It changed clothes. The room chilled. Even the co-hosts stopped fiddling with their earpieces. Joy tried to regroup. "Well," she said, "you're sounding awfully accusatory toward the very nations trying to help your people. This time," she added a chuckle, trying to disarm the weight of his words. But no one laughed. Traoré turned, slowly, to face her again. "You speak of help?" he said. "But my people remember help that came with strings. Help that came with conditions. Help that came with flags planted in our soil, while our voices were buried beneath them." He leaned forward now, not aggressive, not theatrical, just closer. "When we shut down military bases," he said, "we weren't rejecting the world. We were remembering who we were before the world told us what to be." It landed like a drumbeat. The audience didn't erupt. Not yet. But you could feel it building like a storm over still water. Joy smiled tightly. But it was no longer the confident grin of a host steering a ship. It was the smile of someone trying not to show they're off balance. "Okay," she said, chuckling again. "So what you're saying, America is the villain in your story." Traoré didn't blink. "I'm saying the hand that holds the whip doesn't always see the bruise it leaves behind." And just like that, the audience broke. A burst of spontaneous applause echoed through the studio. It wasn't planned. No cue card was raised. It came from somewhere real. Joy tried to laugh it off. "Well, you're certainly dramatic, Mr. Traoré." His reply was a whisper calm, razor sharp. "If it's dramatic to name the truth, then perhaps drama is overdue." The silence this time wasn't uncomfortable. It was reverent. For the first time in her long career, Joy Behar wasn't sure if she was interviewing a politician or attending a quiet reckoning. Behind the cameras, producers panicked. This wasn't the show they'd planned. They whispered into headsets. One made the slicing motion across his neck, cut to break. But the director didn't signal. Not yet. Something was happening. And it was electric. Joy straightened her notes, searching for a new angle. She turned to him again. "You speak with such certainty," she said. "But what makes you so sure your way works? Some say you're authoritarian. You've shut down media outlets. You've detained critics." Her voice was sharper now. This wasn't curiosity. This was survival. But Traoré didn't blink. He didn't even raise his voice. "I silenced the voices that were paid to scream on someone else's behalf." A few gasps. Then stillness. "You confuse discipline with oppression." He continued. "You think strength is corruption, because you've seen too many leaders choose power over people. But I didn't take power to be powerful. I took it to protect the powerless." The audience stirred. Some leaned in. Others glanced at each other, wondering if what they were hearing was allowed to be said. Joy's voice trembled just for a second. "But what about democracy?" Traoré looked at her. Gently. "Your democracy has let men bomb nations and walk free. It has allowed corporations to write laws and call it progress. You speak of liberty. But history remembers the fingerprints." One of the co-hosts, usually loud, stayed silent. Another, across the table, nodded slowly, almost involuntarily. Joy scanned the room and realized she had lost it. Not just control. The story. Traoré wasn't defending himself. He was defining the moment, and the audience wasn't resisting it. They were receiving it. Joy leaned forward again, her voice tighter than before. "So what do you want then?" she asked. "If not partnership, then what?" Traore looked straight at her. One word. Respect. It landed like a verdict. Clear, heavy, unshakable. And for the first time, Joy wasn't unsure of him. She was unsure of herself. The studio grew quiet again. Not because of tension, but because something rare had happened. Truth had entered the room, and it wasn't asking for permission to stay. For a moment, no one said a word. Not Joy, not the co-hosts, not the audience. Because when President Ibrahim Traore said respect, it didn't feel like a political demand. It felt like a reckoning. And it hit everyone, especially Joy, like the final note in a song that had been building all along. She leaned back in her chair, lips pressed tight. For the first time in the segment, she wasn't thinking about ratings or how to spin the next question. She was trying to breathe. Traore sat motionless, not smug, not gloating, just unshaken, as if he hadn't just flipped the room, as if he knew the storm had already passed. Joanna Baker, once the queen of talk television, suddenly looked like the guest in her own studio. She tried to pivot. "You talk a lot about respect," she said carefully. "But don't you think respect is earned? Nations, like people, don't get to demand it. They have to prove it." Traore turned to her, and for the first time, a hint of something softened in his expression. Not sarcasm, not triumph, something closer to sorrow. "You say, earned," he replied, "as if we haven't already paid." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "We bled in your wars. We built your cities. Our minerals power your phones. Our silence bought your comfort. How much more must we prove before we're allowed to speak?" The camera zoomed in, and suddenly, this didn't feel like a television set anymore. It felt like a courtroom, and every word he said was evidence. In the control booth, panic set in. One of the associate producers whispered into a headset, "She's losing the room. Pull up the exit line. Commercial in 30. But the director didn't cut. He was watching what millions would soon be watching, a rare, unscripted shift in the story America tells itself. Back on stage, Joy looked around. She glanced at her co-hosts. None returned her gaze. One stared at her notes. Another just stared at Traore. The air was tight, like it was holding its breath. So she tried one last card. "You sit in that chair," she said, voice rising just a bit. "And you speak like you have the moral high ground. But don't forget, your critics say you suppress free speech. You shut down foreign media. That's not strength. That's control." And for the first time, Traore moved. Not much. Just a slight shift forward. "You confuse noise with freedom," he said. "I didn't shut down truth. I silenced the microphones that were bought to drown it out." The audience stirred. Some nodded. Others leaned forward, transfixed. Joy blinked. "You make it sound like you're the victim." Traore shook his head gently. "No, I'm not the victim. I'm the result. I'm what happens when people who have been ignored for centuries finally speak, not to be saved, but to be seen." Then he turned, looking directly at the camera, and spoke not to Joy anymore, but to the viewers watching at home. "We are not your project. We are not your charity case. We are not waiting in line for your approval. We are simply waking up from a long, imposed sleep, and we are done apologizing for it." The audience burst into applause. Not polite. Not prompted. Real. Joy tried to cut in, but her voice cracked mid-sentence. She cleared her throat, reaching for her final question. Her fingers fumbled the cards. Her face betrayed what her voice was trying to hide. She had lost. Not to a man, but to a moment that refused to be spun. From the back of the room, a studio tech, young, quiet, mostly invisible, stood frozen, watching through his headset. His father was from West Africa. He knew this wasn't just a political interview. It was something else. A reclaiming. A shift in narrative that rarely made it to American screens. Joy inhaled deeply. "If you had one message to give to Americans watching right now," she asked, voice low, "what would it be?" Traoré folded his hands. His answer came slowly, but not hesitantly. "That Africa is not yours to fix. That partnership without respect is just control with better branding. That dignity does not require permission, and that the world does not revolve around approval from the powerful it spins on the stories of the overlooked." Joanna Baker lowered her eyes. No quip. No clever retort. Just silence. Traoré continued. "You taught us about democracy, but exported conditions. You spoke of liberty, but punished it when it didn't serve your interests. You celebrate rebellion in your history, but fear it in ours." Then came the final line. "We are not asking to lead your world. We are simply done following it." The red light above the camera stayed on, but no one was watching the timer anymore. Even the control room had gone still. Because deep down, they all knew this episode wouldn't be remembered for its arguments. It would be remembered for its honesty. The red light above the camera flicked off. And just like that, the studio went dim. No otro music. No applause. Just silence. Joanna Baker exhaled sharply and reached for her mic pack, ripping it from her collar like it burned. Her polished television smile had evaporated, replaced with tension around the mouth. The kind that comes from realizing the story you tried to control had turned into something you couldn't contain. Across from her, President Ibrahim Traoré didn't move. He simply reached for the glass of water on the table and took a small sip, his eyes calm, unfocused, like he wasn't in a talk show studio anymore. But somewhere far beyond it, somewhere still listening to the echo of his own words, a young assistant producer approached cautiously. "Mr. Traoré, would you like anything before we resume?" Traoré turned to him gently. "No, just fairness," he said, then added, with a faint smile, "But I'm used to waiting." The assistant froze. Something in that sentence hit harder than he expected. He gave a small, respectful nod and backed away, as if interrupting the air around Traoré felt inappropriate now. Back in the control room, chaos whispered like wildfire. "He's trending," someone muttered. "We need to soften this next segment. Cut the rest of her questions. She looks rattled." A producer tapped her headset, voice low and urgent. "We need to dial her back. Joanna's losing the room." Joy heard it. It came through her earpiece like static wrapped in insult. Her jaw clenched. She straightened her papers with unnecessary force. "I don't need coaching," she muttered. "I need control." But deep down, she knew control had already left the building. In the far corner of the studio, near the emergency exit. A man stood with his arms folded. He didn't clap. He didn't whisper. He just watched. An American veteran. Uniform jacket. Quiet presence. Traore noticed him. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged, but a slow nod passed between them. Two men from two very different wars. Two kinds of loyalty. And in that small, silent gesture, there was understanding. Back in the audience, a middle-aged woman turned to the person next to her. "Did you hear what he said about respect? About not needing permission?" The other woman nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe we should have been listening sooner." Then the countdown began. 5. Joy sat up straighter, adjusting her jacket like armor. 4. Traore folded his hands in his lap, and still calm. 3. The audience went still, like they were entering church. 2. The control room held its breath. 1. The red light blinked back on. The cameras were rolling again. But something had shifted. The studio lights still burned bright, but they no longer illuminated control. They revealed change. Joy forced a smile tighter this time. More controlled. "Well," she began, her voice measured. "We're back with President Ibrahim Traore. And clearly, the last segment sparked a lot of emotions." She turned slightly, fishing for balance. "So, let's pivot to the future. Your critics say you're walking away from progress, turning your back on international aid, development partnerships, global cooperation." She leaned in. "Is that really sustainable?" Traore didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly. "You see it as isolation?" He replied, "I see it as self-respect." A few murmurs. A couple nods. Joy pressed on. "But won't your people suffer without those partnerships?" His gaze hardened, never angry, just anchored. "My people already suffer," he said. "But not from being alone. They suffer from the cost of borrowed loyalty. Every loan comes with lectures. Every handshake hides a chain." Then, he turned not toward Joy, but toward the audience. "We're not afraid of cooperation. We're afraid of dependency disguised as friendship. We're not against partnership. We're against ownership." The crowd stirred again, something between admiration and awakening. Joy tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "So what?" Then she asked, "You want to do everything on your own?" Traore's response was quick, firm. "No, I want to do it without permission." That line sharp, clear, final, ricocheted through the studio like a gavel. One of the co-hosts, who hadn't spoken the entire show, finally leaned into her mic. "You're saying, when the West acts independently, it's called strength. But when African nations do it, it's rebellion." Traore turned, smiled softly. "I'm saying independence should not be a privilege. It should be a birthright." She nodded slowly. "Damn," she whispered into her mic. The audience laughed not at a joke, but at the honesty. Joy stared down at her cue cards. Suddenly meaningless. Words written for a different kind of guest. A different kind of story. A different outcome. This wasn't what she expected. She looked up, met his eyes, and said almost like a confession, "This wasn't the interview I planned." Traore didn't hesitate. "No," he said. "It was the conversation that needed to happen." And just like that, the studio changed again. It didn't feel like a stage anymore. It felt like a mirror, and everyone in it had to decide what they saw.